Welcome to Blockhouse Bay Baptist Church. It's our online Sunday gathering on the 5th of September. Glad that you've joined us. If you're in New Zealand, happy Father's Day. Hope you and your families are able to celebrate the goodness of what you're up to and to celebrate those dads who have made a significant impact. And not only dads, but also men who have done that in your life. Today I'd like you to grab a few things, two things actually, to help us along the way. Go grab a bank card, yours, or some cash, yours. And while you do that, I'll wait. You have your money. And you already know now what we're going to talk about. Money. And you might be tempted to turn off and say, I'm not interested in this conversation. But I invite you now to just stay on. Don't walk away. In part because I think we don't talk about money in church often enough. And yes, we'll talk about giving. But I also think that we have to talk about it in a more broader perspective because it's really important for us and for our faith life and for the faith life of our community as a church. And so I invite you to stay on. And rather than leave dialogue, write down your notes, your questions, your concerns, your critiques, and send them to me. Let's have a dialogue. Okay, so you've got your money, you've got your card. We're good to go. Let's just admit a couple of things as we get started. One, churches aren't the only institutions or organizations that want your money. The government does. Every year you pay taxes. IRD comes knocking, and you're trying to figure out how to give them less. In part because they want more, and you think they don't deserve that much. They want your money. Stores want your money. Consider all the advertisements in the mall, online, on the television for your money. Stores want your money. Companies, clubs, gyms, they all want your money. Membership, investment, whatever. They want your money. Charities want your money. Consider all the advertisements, but emails and pleas and information that's out there about these different needs around our world where our money could be a benefit to those situations. They want your money. And yes, the church does. But the church isn't even all of it either, right? Your family does too. Particularly if you have kids, they want your money. Will you buy me this? Will you buy me that? Well, you've got your own money. I don't want to spend my money. I want you to. People want our money. Now, I could even say, if you haven't seen some of your family for a long time and they're a little bit distant, if you were to win the lottery, all your family would come talking. They would be interested in your money. So let's just be honest that all these different places want your money. Now, that really wouldn't be a problem, though, would it? If you didn't care about your money, you could just give it here and there, wherever. But the truth is, you also want your money. You want your money. You want to hold on to this for yourself. And so we have to be honest that we all have a vested interest in our money. That's the place where we want to start. Second, money is essential. We can't not live with it. The Bible talks about it. You have to go to the grocery store with money. Otherwise, you'll starve. Third, money has a relation to power. The more money you have, obviously, generally speaking, the more power that you have, or at least the more say you have. The less money that you have usually means the less power you have. No poor presidents or leaders. But we also know that if you win the lottery, besides people coming out the woodwork to try to find you, those people often have their lives wrecked because there's so much money that comes in that it just twists how life works for them, and they often can't handle it. But we also know those who have a lot of money, money affects them too. Money has power, and money talks. In New Zealand, did you know that you can get a resident visa if you have $10 million that you're willing to invest over 3 years? Or if you have $3 million over 4 years? Most people can't get a residency visa in New Zealand without meeting certain categories. But if you have money, you can. Now, we also have to recognize that our relationship with money is not static. You say, I've already decided what I'm doing with my money. It's set. We're in COVID right now, which means that everybody, or in lockdown, almost everybody is somehow impacted or affected. If you've got invested, if you have a business, if you're concerned about your job, you are having your money impacted by this, which means that you're reconsidering your relationship with money, or how you spend it, or where you're going to put it. And so I want us to recognize that Our relationship with money is always on the move, and we must recognize that and keep that aware. That means, though, that we all have an individual relationship with money, and we must recognize that as Christians, or people who are created by God and redeemed by Him, people who are saying that we want to follow Jesus, that we also need to recognize that we're called to reconsider regularly what our relationship with money is. So because of our faith, we are called to interact with money differently than others. Are we considering that? Are we revising, reconsidering, and sorting out our relationship with money in relation to Jesus and what He says? Now, I want to apologize. I've not talked about as much about this as we should. The Bible is full of commentary around money, wealth, poverty, what we do with it. In fact, there's some who would say that 1 in every 16 verses in the New Testament, 1 in every 10 in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and 1 in every 7 in the Gospel of Luke talks about money. That's a lot of talk about money. And if we're not paying attention, my apologies. I also think, though, by nature of us, who think that money is really my decision, not the church's, not the Bible's, it's my decision, we're okay with not talking about money because it means we can do whatever we want with it. Now, as Christians, that doesn't work. Jesus invites us to consider our relationship with money regularly. And so I want to apologize for that and to consider that we need to reflect again. Because our interaction with money not only is about us, but it's about how we interact with our families, our community, our church, our world. It really is a communal decision, not just an independent one. So to do that, I want us to have a look at a couple of texts. Now, we sent them out during the MailChimp, but I'll just tell them to you now, and you can have a read. We'll pause, or you pause us. Psalm 49, Luke 19, 1 through 27, 2 Corinthians 8, 8 through 15, and 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 5. Have a read. We'll be back. So you've read. Those are just a snapshot of some of the things that the Bible talks about, but there's a good snapshot. And what I want to do is I want to have a look particularly in 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 with a couple of verses to guide us in the way that we think. Now, 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, probably one of the most pointed places and theological reflections on our relationship with money that the Bible offers, at least in the New Testament. But again, there's a lot said. And I also want to recognize that 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 is a specific letter written to a specific church in a specific context, reminding this church about what they had agreed to do, is to send money towards the church in Jerusalem for their benefit. So that's the specific context, and it's an encouragement and a challenge there. But also because it's so theologically loaded, we can step back and realize that it's lots of principles for us to take away and apply to our own life without doing any damage to the text. In fact, that we're honoring the theological argument there. So that's what I want us to do, is to have a look there. So first things first. Let's turn to 2 Corinthians 8. And I want us just to read verse 8. It says this: I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. Paul wants to test the sincerity of the generosity of the church in Corinth in accordance with other people. He wants to test them. He wants to confirm, is what you say really true? Now, as a church, we always feel a bit uncomfortable with being tested, but in reality, testing is only revealing the truth of what is there. We say, and this is where we're going to back up and say, we say as Christians, we follow Jesus. We give up our life in order to gain it, right? We die to ourselves in order to gain life, to pick up the cross and follow Jesus. And we've said, basically, as baptized people who have gone to death in the old way and come to new life in Jesus, that everything that we have really is His. We're stewards. And so all this is God's. So God, tell me what you want me to do with these finances that you've given to me. That's the statement we've made as we become Christians. But are we following through with that? And so Paul is testing us and to say, I want to reveal to you, and I want you to prove it, actually, by your actions. Now, how do we test that? Well, I just want to give you a couple of statistics to help us to know where we might fit in the broader category of Christians in relation to giving. Now, again, I realize that I've shifted from the making of money to the giving. But both of these things hold together. And so this is just where we'll go for some statistics. Now, these are primarily focused in the U.S., but I think they probably carry over pretty well for us to consider. But for you, maybe you could say as Kiwis that you're above this, which would be great. But it would be a good place to start. So let's test ourselves. Let's ask ourselves, where do we fit? 80% of Christians in the U.S. give around 2 to 2.5% of their income to church. 80% of Christians give around 2 to 2.5% of their income. And only 5% of Christians tithe or give 10% of their income to church. Now, another statistic that's interesting, tithers make up around either 10 to 25%, somewhere between 10 and 25% of church giving. That means 1 in 10 of you may be giving 10%, or 1 in 4. A striking statistic is this, that people who are making over $75,000, at least in the U.S., only 1% of them give 10%, which goes in line with the statistic, or kind of an observation that the New Zealand Herald had in one of its Insight articles, that in the more financially deprived areas of Auckland, 90% of people held to faith, whereas in the more wealthy areas, less than 50% affiliated with faith. The more money that you have, the seem it's harder to believe in God, or you have less concern for God, and you have less concern for giving, which would prove true Jesus' statement in Matthew 6, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So if we test ourselves, where do we fit? Is our money really ours? Or is it God's? Are we spending a majority on ourselves? Or are we giving a majority of it away? What are we doing with it? And you say, well, Kelly, that's all helpful information, but what's the bar? What am I supposed to be judging myself against? These are interesting stats about other people, but what am I supposed to be doing? So let's have a look. 2 Corinthians 9, 6 through 7. Chapter 9, verse 6 says this, remember this, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and whoever sows generously will reap generously. Each of you should give what you have decided in your heart to give, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. That's not a very clear bar. To sow sparingly means you reap sparingly. To sow generously means you reap generously. But the attitude, well, not reluctantly or begrudgingly, not guilty, but really cheerfully. Okay, so I can sort out cheerfully. I give out of generosity, I give out of gladness. But how much am I supposed to give? Sparingly or generously? Well, the encouragement obviously is to sow generously, because then we can reap generously. But what about a tithe? What am I supposed to do with that? Well, we must recognize it's an Old Testament category that's not reiterated exactly here, although I do believe it's assumed that we will work towards a tithe as a benchmark. But Paul is asking that we use it as a benchmark and then be generous beyond it. And so really, Paul is saying, I'm assuming you're working towards a 10% idea, but I'm really saying we need to be more generous than that. We need to keep moving beyond that and keep growing to sow generously rather than sparingly. And what does it do then? So if we give the tithe, or if we give more generously, what's it going to? What's it happening? Well, that's where we think about Luke 19, where there's this parable that reminds us that Jesus has gone away. He is the nobleman, but he's also distant from the nobleman, because you can see they're different in the way that they act and respond. But the idea is that God's people are waiting for Jesus to come back and have been given gifts, been given finances, been given paychecks, been given resources. And what are we supposed to do with that? We're supposed to invest it in order that we might reap generously. And so we're called, though, to give funds to the church. And 10% is where it's a good place to start, in order that we might invest it into the kingdom reality. So if you give money to this church, it goes towards the ministry to kids. And you might be like, I don't have any kids, what do I care? But really, the development of our kids is the continuation of God's church here. If you give and you don't have any youth, but yet there's a youth pastor here who's helping the development of our youth to be more mature disciples. If you give and you say, well, I don't really care about the community, but you're giving and there's someone here who's serving helping us serve the community and getting in ways and connected so that we can serve the needs of those that we say we're here to serve. We give and it supports the missions that go across the world. It supports the building that we come to worship at, as well as serve from. It's the transformation station that we say this is where we belong, this is where we minister out of, but also where we're transformed. All these funds that we give help to do more than we could do on our own. And so investment is building into God's people, but also to his place of where he's got us located so that we can benefit out. So giving looks like beyond the 10%, generously, with a cheerful heart, not only to church, but to the work of God's kingdom, to the investment in the lives of other people, to watch them grow beyond our ability to comprehend, so that we can reap generously with where that finance goes. So does that sound scary to you? You say, yeah, I'm not there. If I test myself, I'm not anywhere near that 10%. I'm not even anywhere past that. Why should I do this? This sounds like I need all the money that I can get. Let's review. If you go to 2 Corinthians 8, verse 9, after Paul says he was going to test, he says this, "For don't you know that the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for our sake he became poor, so that you through his poverty might become rich." Jesus is already showing us the way forward. He became poor. Although he was rich, he gave of himself and his wealth away so that we might become rich. Jesus became poor on our behalf in order that we might be rich. Jesus has sowed generously in order that he might reap generously people who would come up after him and be his people in the world. So God's already showing, you know what? I have done this for you. You are experiencing grace in your life. Everything that you have is because of my grace towards you, because I gave away the riches that I had to become poor so that you might have. God is gracious in giving. But not only is he gracious in giving us grace, but he's also telling us something else. So if you go to chapter 9, verse 10 and 11, he says this, "Now he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will also supply and increase your store of seed and will enlarge the harvest of your righteousness. You will be enriched in every way so that you can be generous on every occasion, and through us your generosity will result in thanksgiving to God." God's promising that he's going to continue to abundantly provide for us. Again, for our needs, not for all of our wants, but for our needs, so that we can be generous. He's saying, I will make sure you have what you need so that you can keep pouring out, sowing seeds generously to other people. So all this finance that we have, all this money that we earn is not for us. It's so that we can be generous. And we can be people who sow generously in order to reap generously for God's kingdom and God's purposes. It's not for us to pad our lives with comfort. It's for us to give to the benefit of others. It's us helping carry on what Jesus' work started. So to give is to recognize that God's grace is what allows us to have the wealth that we have, and that God's grace is going to continue to provide for our needs. But we need to remember Psalm 49, which basically is saying, be careful to not be deceived by wealth. The more that we have, it can move our hearts away from God, and it can take us away from trusting him and believing in him and following him, because we get comfortable with all that we have and we don't need God. We can take care of ourselves, thank you very much. And so the giving, this generosity, is actually to keep our hearts set on God. We need to keep giving it away, lest our heart becomes hard. And so the gift of giving is a spiritual discipline that helps us to keep trusting Jesus more. So if we keep getting more money and we keep giving less and less, that tells us where our heart is. It's on the gifts that we've been given, and not on the giver. So what do I want you to do? If God is testing us and saying, hey, is your money where your mouth is? And saying this investment is really to be generous and cheerful, and that we can give more than we realize, and we can give to a 10% plus more in a generous way to see what God is going to do with this gift. And he's going to undergird that by his grace and by his abundance. What should we be doing? Well, first, if you aren't living within the means that you're given, set a budget. Have somebody help you. Ask for help on that. Set a budget so you live within your means. And then in those budget lines, build in a giving element of your budget. If you're giving, but your percentage is really low, then I would say increase it. Because really this isn't just the work of those tithers, that 10 to 25%. It's not for them to carry the load of the church. It's for us as a church to carry the load of the financial responsibilities of this place. So all of us need to be considering how to move our percentage marks up for the benefit of the church and for the investment of what we're doing here. So I would invite you to look at your budget and increase your investment into the work of the church. If you're at 10%, amazing. Paul is inviting you to figure out, can you sow even more generously? With a cheerful heart, can you do that? Figure out where you can do that at. Where you can give, what you can sacrifice, what you can maybe adjust in order that you can give more generously. We are called to reconsider. And if you feel like, I'm good, pretty sure I'm all right, I'm not going to give more, I want to caution you that God is saying the giving is a part of our discipleship. And he wants us to trust in the generosity of him that we might be generous. Be careful of your heart, lest you have money turn your heart away from God. Giving is a practice that helps us to grow in faith and trust and gladness and thankfulness for the rich benefit that God gives to us. So test him, try him, and see if he will be abundant with you. Now lastly, as you're trying to figure out how to give these things away and to invest more in God's kingdom, to give more to the church, men, I want you to take some of this cash. And I want you to stick a line item in your budget. Small, maybe $10 a month. And I want you to consider who you can invest this in. Yes, this will get you 2 cups of coffee or 2 Cokes, a set of chips and some extra aioli that you can take and you can invest in somebody else. I want you to consider how you do that, because investing is not just giving money and investing that financially, but it's investing in other people. And I would love that the men of our church would be people who are investing in the lives of others. Other men, young, older, kids that need you to help them to know how to live faithful lives to Christ and can see that investing it in other people is a practice that we as a church support and uphold. Now, of course, we do this appropriately, we do this wisely, but I want us to think about this as Father's Day, is that we are called to invest in other people. How are we going to do that? Let's be proactive. So remember, everybody wants your money, and so does God. And he wants you to use it well and wisely for his kingdom come, not only for the praise of his glory and the good of his people, but for the good of you. Because he wants you to have a right relationship with money. And so giving is a practice that allows us to not have money take hold of our heart in the wrong ways, but actually to allow us to trust and experience God's grace in more and more amazing ways. So let us be a people who sow generously, so that we might reap generously and see what God is going to do. And let's do this with a cheerful heart. Peace. We'll see you soon.